My ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome. Today we all have the privilege to be witness to an international scientific extravaganza. To Prague have arrived a whole host of young scientists from all around the world, contestants of this year's FameLab, International FameLab competition in Cheltenham in England. Each of which today will present to you all, in the time span of just 3 minutes or so, a scientific gem of a story. Next to me stands the young, the beautiful, the charming, the intelligent, and gentlemen, the as yet unmarried Katya Sephton, which I please ask you to warmly welcome with a round of applause. Katya Sephton.
Hello, good afternoon. I, in turn, would like to introduce the not quite so young, but still handsome, and ladies, unfortunately, still very married, Dr. Michael Londesborough.
Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to start with thanking our sponsors and organizers, the British Council, the Karel Janeček Foundation for Science and Research, RSJ Algorithmic Trading, Tomáš Baťa Foundation, and last but not least, the Prahatsáchy Society, who have graciously allowed us to use this marble hall in the Klamgalas Palace today. And today, also, we have Steve Oxley, who's the director of the British Council in the Czech Republic, and if he would say a few words.
Yes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. FameLab's a British Council initiative which has now gone around the world. It's operating in many countries. So it's proof, if proof were needed, that you can present science and scientific ideas in interesting, stimulating way. So today I hope you enjoy our past participants that took part in FameLab. I hope you learn something, and I hope maybe some of you think about joining in next time, next year, or in future FameLabs. I just want to take a moment to thank the Academy of Science. This is part of a Science Week, and it's been a busy week, and there's still a few events going on, so I hope you've been to some of those events and you can get to see more. British Council is proud to be a partner in the Science Week programme. I'd like to thank Michael Londesborough for his generous support again, and obviously the Klamgalas Palace for hosting us today. So I'll stop there, but please enjoy the event and enjoy your science. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
So, without further ado...
First of all, something about the proceedings of today's proceedings. Sorry. Today's proceedings will follow the normal rules of any FameLab competition, with one major and important exception. All of our contributors will have, indeed, 3 minutes or thereabout to talk about the subject of their choice. And they are allowed to bring with them any item or any prop that they can take with them, they can carry with them onto the stage. However, today will be slightly different in the sense that today is not a competition. There's going to be no adjudications, no voting, no point scoring. Today is just about having a lot of fun and listening to some fascinating science.
So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first FameLab finalist. She's from the neighboring country of Poland. Please welcome Monika Koperska.
Monika will be telling us about the collection, the storage of data, and about how you got to fight back the law, the second law of thermodynamics, and how that affects the storage of data. Now, for those of you who are not too familiar with the second law of thermodynamics, we have a demonstration. Katya. Katya is holding an item of structure and complexity. It's called a balloon. Okay. Now, Katya, please. that structure and complexity is now gone. The balloon is no longer here because
The second law of thermodynamics drives everything in the universe from a state of complexity to a state of non-complexity.
Now, the question is, can Monica convince us that through her work, can they hold back this immensely powerful second law of thermodynamics when it comes to storing data? Monica, please.
Thank you. Time is passing by all the time. And although everything that surrounds us seems to be stable and durable, it is in fact constantly drawn by a mechanism that slowly but consequently leads to its total decomposition. So if we wanted to store an idea for, let's say, hundreds of years, what do we write it on? On stone? Well, the storage capacity is not very big. On parchment? It's not very economic, costly. On magnetic tape? Well, it's going to demagnetize in about 30 to 50 years. On a CD, we start to lose information after 2 to 5 years. On a USB, well, my last one burned in a year. In the cloud, so shredded bytes of information stored on servers all over the world. Yes, as a humanity, we really had a lot of different ideas what to store our data on, like these huge floppy disks, which no one uses anymore, or the rear memory banks on which the data from the probes to Mars Viking in '76 were stored on. Well, 20% of that precious information from Mars is already irreversibly gone. To decode the rest, we need a digital archaeologist, because yes, a job like that exists already. So what do we choose? Let's think of paper for a moment. Paper, therefore cellulose, therefore a polymer, therefore a long string of repeating fragments. Each fragment is a ring composed of atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And each ring is bent in a very chemically stable chair conformation. In this position, paper can relax for a long time. Paper is stable, therefore it's long-lasting. Unless we don't improve on the paper-making process, and it becomes less durable. And we did just that. In the middle of the 19th century, we added an acidic additive to paper. And I'm sure you know what I mean. It's books that have yellowed pages, like here. They have a specific smell. And sometimes when we try to read them, they totally decompose in our hands. Why is that? Let's have a look inside. Well, it's because the acidic environment left in the paper a compound, a hydrogen cation, that accelerates breaking of chains and makes them shorter. Now, shorter chains means weaker paper. Fortunately, today, we can deacidify the book and thus get rid of the annoying intruder. So, a book printed nowadays on a good quality paper can last 200, 300, even 400 years. And you know what's best? Is that we can decode the information written on paper with the most basic equipment known to man: a hand, an eye, and a brain. Time is passing by all the time, but we as a civilization are not yet ready for the book to pass away. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And are there any questions from the floor? You have the opportunity to ask an expert here or just to contribute a comment. Anybody? If not, then Monica, I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
So the amount of data that we're storing is exponentially increasing all the time.
Yes.
And is it really, won't it be too heavy, just the sheer quantity of paper? If we were to use paper more, wouldn't it be the sheer quantity of paper to be used? Wouldn't it be just too heavy?
Well, first of all, we would like to decide what we want to preserve for centuries. I mean, everything we chat about or we put on Facebook, maybe not everything is worth lasting for so long. And then again, we have a question of language itself. I mean, some language will take larger space, and some if we, for example, use pictograms, it's going to use smaller space. And then again, we can use big letters or really, really tiny letters. So it's all a question of choosing a coding system that we want to code our information in. But yes, I do agree that paper is something that's most common and most long-lasting out of the common used storage data mediums right now. But it's not the ultimate solution. And we as humans, we are drawn by curiosity and invention all the time, should look for new ideas, new inventions, how to store data on. And for example, the new ways the researchers are researching right now is putting our information on a DNA. So you can imagine a book of 300 pages weighing about 1 kilogram. But if you put it on a DNA, it's going to weigh about 0.1 femtogram, which is 10 to minus 15. So if I put it on the tip of my finger, you wouldn't even see it. So there are solutions that probably in the future will make the storage of data much, much lighter.
I see, thank you very much. And also, I like the point of being selective with what data we store. I suppose one value of putting it on paper is that you are more selective because it's more perhaps expensive. You know, it's very easy to save digital data and yet more profound to put it onto paper.
Yes, and think of that if you are to write an email, you just write whatever you think. But if you sit down in front of the desk with a piece of paper and a pen, you put more mind to it because you know it's going to be written on something you can touch.
You're suggesting to us to use the paper and to not forget the paper, but how about the environmental issue? Because we already cut lots of forests.
That's true. I mean, today we make paper from wood. It's not historically, it not always has been like that. Before the 19th century, we made it from cotton, from hemp, from linen. And the thing is that that change was made because there was a huge demand to use more and more paper. And at that time, wood was just cheaper and was not used for many purposes. And the fact is that making a change like that made our paper weaker. Remember that I told you that shorter chains means weaker paper. Well, the chains in wood are shorter by default. The chains in cotton or hemp are 10 times longer. So actually, it would be a very smart thing to stop making paper from wood and try to make these big plantations of linen, for example, just devoted to making paper. That would make paper more long-lasting, and it would probably save forests.
Any more questions? No, well, in that case, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've got a little bit of time. I just need to sort out my hair. Where's my? I got it here somewhere. Here's my brush. Yep. Okay. I don't think that they just don't make things how they used to anymore, do they? Where is this made anyway? Czech schmade.
Michael, your problem is one of component failure.
Young lady, I'll have you know that all my components are in perfect working order.
I was referring to your hairbrush, Michael.
Yeah.
Luckily today, we have with us our Czech FameLab 2012 winner, who's an expert on component failure. Please give it up for Dr. Jan Klusák.
Hello. Oh, sorry. This is the door handle of the toilet. It's come off in my hand. I wonder, do you also get upset when something comes off in your hand? The handle of your electric kettle, for instance? So, luckily, I can help you, as I am an expert on failure of components. But back to your kettle. Even my grandma would have told you an old Czech proverb: you keep using a jug for water until the handle breaks off. Yet to wait until the handle breaks off, it usually takes ages. And besides, the trial and error method is quite expensive. So let me show you now how we can predict what the handle, kettle, or any other component is able to bear. First, we test the materials of components in laboratories on simple samples with a crack. Then we can model the component, however complex, in computers, and we identify critical places where a crack may appear. These are the red points. Yet a problem remains: how we can use the material data measured on simple samples to predict behavior of complex components. Well, we study what the cracks and the critical points have in common. It can be some physical magnitude. For example, an opening stress which opens the crack, and in the same way, it opens the critical point, causes the crack, and thus failure of the component. And how to calculate this? Even my grandma was puzzled by this, and of course she had another proverb at hand. 100 times nothing killed a bull. Yes, typical grandma, she forgot to tell me how big this nothing was. So let's modify the formula a little bit. Let's add here pressure characteristic measured in laboratory. Let's transform the zero into shape function of the crack. We slap the shape functions of the critical points here. Let's add here the loading character gained from the numerical solution. Easy, yes? Finally, we can underline this at the superscripts. And my confused grandma says, "Oh man, Johnny, the formula is as big as..." I know, Granny, the formula is as big as Prague Castle. But no problem. Now we can cancel the beef cattle on both sides of the equation. And we get a beautiful formula for the load bearing under which the component breaks. And if the actual loading is lower than the critical one, tak potom máme kliku. Then even cattle can't break the kettle.
So if anyone has any questions, actually I have one. Which components tend to fail the most? And is there a blacklist of these components?
Yeah, I think that you have your own blacklist. Everyone has his own blacklist of components. In my case, it can be a ruler. Maybe since the start of September, I had to buy 5 or 6 rulers for my son to school. So the ruler is #1 on the blacklist of broken components.
Well, I have problems with hairbrushes.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any questions?
I've got one. It would be because so you're working on the cutting edge of science, on the research aspect. So you perhaps you get to know very new materials, sort of less traditional materials such as carbon fibers and the rest of it. Are these materials substantially better? Do they have less propensity to fail?
It depends on type of loading. Of course, they are in some aspects more and more better than traditional materials, but every composite material has also interface between two materials, and the interface is good critical point to start for crack initiation. Yeah.
Any other questions or points, or does anybody here have a particular item which often fails? A material you could ask for some advice. Perhaps you would get an explanation of
Yes?
Is your mathematical method used in practice in huge?
Not in huge. These results are quite new, and it lasts also some time to put it, to learn it, some experts and so on. But there are some experts which contacted us, and they can learn this method and use this in practice. Yeah.
So, for example, a company making hairbrushes can phone you up and say, can you test this hairbrush?
Probably, I will ask them. I guess they are working with some electromechanics, but hairbrushes may be part of their production.
Okay, great. So if no other further questions, thank you very much, and a round of applause. Hey, Katya.
What?
Come here.
What?
I've got something to show you.
Yeah, I've heard that line before.
No. Seriously, I've got something very interesting to show you.
Yeah, what is it?
It's in this little box. I've made a discovery, you see.
What is it?
I've discovered a new species. A new species of spider. It's little, it's hairy, and it's got 10 legs. So quickly, phone the Academy of Sciences, tell them all about it, announce the discovery, we're going to be famous.
Wait, are you going to show it to me first?
You want to see it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's there.
Where?
There.
Where?
There.
I don't think I'll be calling the Academy anytime soon. Your new spider has just become extinct. Luckily, all the way from Serbia, we have an expert on extinction and the prevention of extinction using breeding centers. Please give it up for Mili Krvavak.
Hello. So beside this kind of extinction, do you know the real reason why species actually become extinct? A very good example of this can be found in Sri Lankan jungles that I recently came back from. In 1867, colonizers brought the first tea plant to Sri Lanka. At that moment, nobody in wildest dream could have a thought that such a beneficial plant would become a mass murderer. Plantations have replaced tropical forests. In just 150 years, 97% of primary rainforest have been cut down. However, what interests us are the effects on life of those 3% remaining. So, different organisms have diversely adapted for new changes. Monkeys, elephants, and other migratory groups have simply moved from one fragment of the forest to another one. Birds have flown away. And what about amphibians, frogs, for example, the subject of my research? These are non-migratory animals. They're mostly associated with small microhabitat. For example, one type of leaf on a plant may be the habitat for one species. They communicate between each other through metapopulations, which are series of small populations called lemma that are connected. So it is understood in the nature that probability of extinction of this small local group is real and relatively common, but usually they are renewed by other immigrants from other local populations. So, but the question is, what happens when these immigrants simply do not exist due to the physical barrier, which is tea in this case? This leads to a genetic drift. This is a process where a frequency of groups of genes called alleles changes through generations. In other words, frog incest takes place in a population that counts no more than 50 individuals. So 18 species extinct forever, and 47 is endangered. Nature ruthlessly eliminates them. And now you're surely wondering what will happen to them. Even frogs have never been your cup of tea, especially those from Sri Lanka, I guess. But science has a solution. It's called ex situ, which involves careful and accurate collection of best specimens that are grown in artificial simulated conditions, which are then mated with another unrelated specimen, and hatchlings will be returned to the habitat that is sustainable, and actually this brings new gene flow into small populations. So, as you're all global and responsible citizens, I'm sure you want to do something about this. Even raising awareness about this topic would be sufficient. But the answer is breeding center in Sri Lanka in a perfect natural condition. So help us make this happen. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Estimate the ratio between known and unknown organisms that are in process of extinction.
Yeah, actually, in this moment, it's really a shame for humanity. There are lots of species that are going extinct, but we didn't discover them even yet, especially insects and low vertebrates like frogs. So that means like they didn't get the name even, and they become extinct. So at this point, in this moment, I can't estimate the amount of species that are extinct. But in this moment, the level of extinction is similar like the level of extinction during the dinosaurs. It's the same level in this moment in 21st century. So, yeah, welcome.
Anyone else?
Any more questions? Or perhaps do you have any comments about what was just said now about the fact that we're living in an age of extinction, where a lot of species are just disappearing? Does anybody have any comments about that? Any questions? Well, if not, I have a question.
Okay.
It's fascinating. I'm just trying to imagine these frogs. They're brought into captivity, and then they've got to breed.
Okay.
So, what are the major troubles that you have in getting them to breed? You know, how do you get the romance going?
Okay. Yeah, it's a question. So at the beginning, we will pick up the small animals. That means the juveniles. So they will grow into the artificial conditions, and most of low vertebrates they survive and they interact just with instincts. Mm-hmm. They use just instincts. So after few generations, they will used to it to live in captivity. But the main problem is when we get hatchlings of the frogs, how to feed them, because we have to fight such a small creatures that their feeds, especially the spot endemic, the really specific one. So to make the romance, it's more easier.
So
I think
romance is okay. Feeding
I would say it's more difficult, how to feed them. That's my answer.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
When you release the frogs, do they have much trouble readapting to the wildlife?
Yeah, it's also an issue because the problem is depends on the species. 2 or 3 months, they become strong enough to survive and to discover the strategies how to survive in the nature. But the main problem is a habitat, because as you heard, 97% of the forest it's already gone, and it's a tropical forest, and it refused any I would say cooperation, because when you cut the rainforest once, it takes a 1,000 years to grow again, because the soil is very poor. So the thing is when you release the frog, the main question is where to release the frog. So if we want to save the genes, we have to make the breeding centers and maybe waiting for a better times.
I wanted to ask, why frogs? Is it the type of animal you really like?
Yeah, compared with another vertebrates, they're more endangered because they're more sensitive. They breathe in the water, they breathe in the air. So the skin is semi-permeable. They're sensitive to pollutions in the water, in the air. But besides that, they're very useful. Some bioactive substances that are taken from the frog skin are using for cancer disease. And now it's very popular. They replace a Botox even. So in a few years, maybe some of you will need frog poison to for a better looking. So they're, I think, important. Of course, they are they reduce the flies. Imagine the flies all around without the frogs. So we are all linked. Even many people ask me why frogs. So there are many reasons, I would say.
Oh, I have something for you this time.
1 minute. That's my line.
I'll just borrow it for now.
Okay.
Look. Watch.
What you gonna? What's this one?
Well,
That's amazing, Katya. How did you do it?
well, the heat from this torch wobbled the electrons that are dissolved in the chemicals in those sprays and thus produced light.
The wobbling of electrons to produce
Yeah.
light. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing, in fact, indeed, that our eyes are so sensitive to this wobbling around that we can detect very subtle differences in wavelengths, only hundreds of tens of nanometers. And that difference we see as different colors. I think that's a fascinating aspect of our development as a human species. And also that the fact that we've got two eyes allows us to see in 3D. We can get stereoscopic vision. In fact, I've got whilst we're on 3D imaging and stereoscopic vision, I've got something you can all do. If you take a piece of paper, if you all take a piece of paper and roll it up, like this, just like this. Okay, you got it? Hold your paper in your right hand, and keeping both your eyes open. Both your eyes open. Place the roll of paper over this eye, open. This eye is also open. And then you take your left hand and put it towards the end of the paper, and then slowly bring your hand towards your face, like I'm doing now. And what do you see? Can you see it? You should see a hole in your hand. I'm now looking at all of you through the hole in my hand, or at least what I perceive to be the hole in my hand. Bring your hand close to your eye, getting you closer, slowly closer, and you'll see the convergence and a hole in your hand. Now that's due to stereoscopic vision, and I think we need to know something a bit more about this. What do you think, Katya?
Definitely.
And luckily for us, we have an expert on 3D imaging. And so please welcome, he's from the tropical island, otherwise known as the UK, Dr. Andrew Steele.
We've got hot tickets to the premiere of the critically acclaimed new release, Aliens vs. Giant Dinosaur Bees in Space 5, in 3D. But how to fill the awkward conversational vacuum before the film begins? What better way than to explain to your beloved-to-be how 3D glasses work? So, things look 3D out here in the real world because you've got two eyes. Get your finger and hold it in front of your face like this. Then close your right eye and look at it with just your left. And then swap eyes. Can you see that as you swap your eyes back and forth, your nearby finger seems to move against the faraway background? Judging the difference between the image seen by each eye is one of the ways your brain constructs a three-dimensional model of the world around you. So, if you want to make a 3D movie, all you need to do is film every scene with two identical cameras, about the same distance apart as human eyes. But when you're playing it back, how can we make sure that the right image gets to the right eye? We're going to need a property of light. Like jam, light comes in different flavors, but unlike jam, there are only two. These flavors are called polarizations, and they arise because light is a wave. So if I shone a beam of light at you guys right now, it could either wobble up and down, that's vertically polarized, or from side to side, that's horizontally polarized, as it travels forwards. Now, most light is a mishmash of the two, but we can use a polarizing filter to select just one flavor of light at a time. We could even make a pair of 3D glasses, which use horizontally polarized light for the left eye and vertically polarized light for the right, and then play the film back on a corresponding pair of projectors. Now, sadly, there's a problem with this, and the problem arises if you tilt your head. Imagine you're leaning on your date's shoulder, and they're a bizarrely long way away. Maybe this date isn't going so well. So your head is tilted at an angle of 90 degrees. You'll get the left eye's image through the right eye and the right eye's image through the left, which will make you feel pretty sick, and you'll probably vomit all over their lap. And you don't need a scientist to tell you that that is a cinema date disaster. Luckily, there is a solution. We can use so-called circularly polarized light, a kind of light which, instead of wobbling, spirals through space. We can make a different pair of 3D glasses, which use light spiraling clockwise for the left eye and anti-clockwise for the right eye. And this comes with a big advantage. Clockwise and anti-clockwise don't change as you tilt your head, so the correct information is always delivered to the correct eye. So, no vomiting, and the perfect icebreaker. That's how science could save your date at the cinema.
Does anyone have any questions for Andrew?
Has anyone vomited at the cinema?
Thank you for this nice inspiration. And do you have some suggestion also for the second and third date?
I suggest different films.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question.
Go on.
How does one get light to oscillate in a spiral motion?
So that's quite hard. There's no such thing as a circular polarizing filter. I can't just give you a special bit of glass that will make light circularly polarized instantaneously. You have to do it in 2 stages. And the first stage is actually to make normal linearly polarized light, so light that's wobbling in a certain direction. Then you have to pass it through a special kind of material called a birefringent material. And there are things like calcite is birefringent, so it's a kind of crystal you can dig out of the ground. And if you get a piece of calcite and look at a line through it, look at the stalk of a plant or something like that, you'll see that that line doubles up when you look through the crystal. You see 2 lines. And that's because the different polarizations of light are treated differently. So if you've got normal light, you end up with a double image. But if you've got light that's already polarized, and you make this thing exactly the right thickness, you can smack that linearly polarized light and knock it off kilter, and it comes out as a spiral. So by using this 2-layer sort of effect, you can make circularly polarized light.
Fascinating. So crystals have the key.
Any questions? Is there any way we could use only 1 projector instead of 2?
They actually, in a lot of the modern 3D films, they do only use 1 projector, but they flick very, very rapidly between the polarizations of light. So no, you always have to have light that's in some way unique to those eyes. But what they normally do in a modern 3D film is they actually project, a normal film has 24 images every second. This projects 120 images a second, and 3 of them are one and 3 of them are the other. So they sort of interleave them to try and make it look less wobbly.
So that's how 3D TVs work.
That's harder, because anything that doesn't need glasses, that's very tricky. You need to project the light in such a way as it'll only go into the correct eye, and that's difficult. That's harder than this.
Well, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
I've got a surprise for you.
Another one. I hope it's better than that spider.
Yeah, of course. I've composed a song for you. Do you want to hear it?
Well, go on then, if I must.
Okay, ready. Down the way where the nights are gay and the sun shines dearly on the mountain top, I took a trip on a sailing ship, and when I reached Jamaica, I made a stop, but I'm sad to say I'm on my way, won't be back for many a day. My heart is down, my head is turning around. I had to leave a little girl in Prague town. You're not listening to, I made that song for you.
Mike, I have to be honest.
I was working it for 2 days.
Mike, I have to be honest. It's not that good. But, don't be sad. I know of someone who can help you with your musical composing.
Who's that?
She's come all the way from Israel. Please give it up for Yael Grossman.
Hi. I've been playing the violin for quite some time, but when I heard what I'm about to play you now, it just blew me away. See if you can figure out why. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The thing is, this piece was composed by a very talented computer. Meet Emily Howell, a computer program created by Professor David Cope of Santa Cruz University. Emily's music has been applauded by audiences who had no idea that Emily was not, in fact, human. Even music experts couldn't tell the difference between Emily's creations and those of famous composers. Do you realize how incredible this is? Let's take it from another angle. You just met someone online, you're chatting, they're smart, they're funny. You may have met the love of your life. But what if you were to discover that the charming person at the other end isn't even human? It's a computer program and you had no idea. This scenario was envisioned 60 years ago by the father of computer science, Alan Turing. The Turing test determines that if a person interacts with a computer and another human being but can't tell the difference between them, that machine is intelligent. By this criterion, Emily may be an intelligent composer. So what's the secret? How can a machine make music? Emily contains a database of thousands of classical works and jazz. Professor Cope has broken them up into building blocks, creating a musical language. In the same way we compose sentences based on grammar, Emily composes meaningful melodies based on music theory. That's how Emily creates music. But seriously, guys, come on, this isn't real creativity, right? She's not making anything new. She's just putting together bits and pieces that somebody else wrote. Real musicians compose from bleeding hearts and tortured souls. David Cope begs to differ. He claims that even Mozart and Beethoven composed their great works based on a similar database in their heads. Folk songs, bird calls, maybe lullabies. And that true genius lies in the ability to combine these inputs, creating something new and original. So that just leaves us with one final question. Who are we to say that Emily isn't at least as creative as our very own personal computer? Thank you.
Any questions? I have one, actually. Can Emily write lyrics to the music she composes?
Based on sort of rules from grammar?
Well, I just want to point out that there was a recent song, I understand it was rather successful, by Justin Bieber, and the lyrics to that were baby, 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 oh, baby, baby, baby. So she can definitely do better than that. But to answer your question, yes, Emily also composes poetry, and I expect she could also compose song lyrics.
Any questions?
Well, I think obviously such a program will help me in my composition for love songs for Katya. So my question is, how long do I have to wait before I can download an app on my iPad and start composing?
Well, that would probably take some time, as seeing that there is only one in existence, and it is the life work of Professor Cope, and it took him about 20 years to build. So I expect we'd have to wait another couple of decades before we could compose things on an app.
How about any of you? Would you be interested in such a program? Would you like to have a program on your computer which can you just get it to let it to go and to form new music?
Would be musicians interested in this program?
Good question.
Yes, well, it's actually received very mixed reviews because people have a strong emotional reaction to this sort of thing. I mean, they say, and I didn't say, this isn't real creativity for a reason, because if a computer can compose something that generates an emotional response in people, then what does that make us? I mean, maybe we're not as special as we like to think. Then again, maybe we are.
Isn't the art actually about what a person can create, the feelings that they put into it, not what Emily puts into it? Because what Emily does, all it does is just, it thinks up something. It doesn't feel for it, however.
Does it make a difference?
It should make a difference. The art is about emotions and feelings and thoughts, not just thoughts alone.
But does it make a difference to you if you don't know? I'm a musician, and if I was to take out my violin and I was to play you a piece, and you would think it's a beautiful piece, and you would say, who is the composer? And I would tell you the composer is a machine. Would it make the music any less beautiful?
Afterwards, probably yes. If I
Wait,
well, that is debatable, sir.
It's a fair point. I think just to
it is a fair point.
It's a fair point, of course. I think there's how people feel about art and all those subtleties. It's a fair point. Maybe we can have a show of hands. Who believes that it loses its art if it's composed by a non-emotional computer? If you believe that's the case, if it loses that dimension of art, raise your hand. So at least 50%, about 50%. It's about a 50-50 split, which is interesting.
And that was actually one of the main controversies. I mean, they go up to Professor Cope and they say, Professor, you're actually saying that Mozart and Beethoven and Bach are not that special after all. And he says, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And this is a very sort of controversial statement to make.
Yes.
Why do you think that Emily is useful?
I think that this is the sort of thing that would inspire people or would inspire me to study something like computer science, because it's at the base of the questions. What is artificial intelligence? How far can a computer go? What is the difference between us? Can we create a computer that will eventually replicate the workings of the human brain? It's a bit about how we act also. I think that's very fascinating, in my opinion.
Can you set, for instance, mood into the input of the program?
You can set a lot of things into the input of the program. And the first version of the program was to create music in the style of famous musicians. And so it learned the style, and then it created in the style of. And then the next generation was to create original music. And then it started creating, this very sort of avant-garde modern music, which was actually like what modern musicians or modern classical music is nowadays. So yes, you could tune that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in thy mind to suffer the slings and arrows of an outraging fortune and pitiful existence, or take arms against that sea of horror, that sea of problems, and opposing it, end it. To die, to sleep.
Mike, what in the universe are you doing?
Well,
Who wrote that?
It's science. I mean, I was reading Nature the other day, and it said there that committing suicide can actually be good for you. Suicide can help you survive.
So you decided to test it here?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know much about what he's talking about, but I do know someone who can tell you and us more about it. Please give a warm welcome to this year's International FameLab 2012 champion, Didak Carmona.
Hello, good afternoon. I have very good news for you. Your cells, the cells of all of you, are dying. They're committing suicide right now. In fact, until you go to bed, a few more billions will die. These dead cells will then be cleaned up by your immune system, and here are the good news, replaced by fresh and new ones. So yes, the cells in our bodies, they incorporate a suicide program, which they can and sometimes must switch on, because under certain circumstances, the bodies and our cells can profit from the death of single cells. But why? Well, the course of our lives, our little cells here, are exposed to a whole series of different damaging factors like chemicals or irradiation that can change their genetic information, resulting in so-called mutations. In those cases, our sweet and happy, always cheerful cells begin to change into bad cells, like this one. Cells that represent a threat for our bodies. This threat is then recognized and the suicide program is switched on. And so the threat is eliminated. However, there's an eye there. However, under certain circumstances, these bad cells cannot kill themselves. So the suicide program does not work anymore. Well, and in those cases, such a bad cell can continue growing and dividing without restriction. And that is the beginning of a tumor, cancer. So it would be cool if we could just take such a bad cell and force it to kill itself again. And that is exactly what we try in our lab. We extract different substances from different natural products like tea or coffee or wine, and these substances are able to force these cancer cells to commit suicide again. So what I usually do in the lab is I just take a substance like this one and feed it to the cells. Of course, nicely wrapped, because you want the bad cells to take it up. But once they have taken it, these substances, and you already know what's going to happen, may activate an alternative suicide pathway that can eliminate the threat. So, what we hope with our research is to help in the improvement of new or better anti-cancer strategies. And by the way, during the last 3 minutes that you've been listening to me, around 50 million cells have taken their own lives in each of your bodies. So congratulations. Keep on with those suicide rates. And, well, think about that that death keeps you alive. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
How do you get those substances that cause them to kill themselves actually to the right cells and not to the...
Right. So we have, we don't do that by ourselves. We don't extract them directly, but we have cooperation partners that, with chemical procedures, extract them from these natural products. Or you can also buy them. So we're basically screening a whole series of different compounds that we have retrieved from different sources, basically.
Is the suicide mechanism, suicide job, work only of the best cells or the...
That's a very good question, actually. In fact, this is only one part of the story. The other part of the story is if you have too much death, even though you shouldn't. Like, for example, in neurons, there exists the possibility for in Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease where neurons that should not kill themselves, kill themselves. So then you have cells disappearing that should stay there. And for example, that's a problem. So we also screen for substances that actually deactivate this system under the respective circumstances. But it's a complex manner or a complex situation to really target the cells you want to target.
How do you test them?
That's also a very good question. We have a bottom-up approach. That means that we start with simple organisms, and then when we find a substance that does something to these organisms, we go up the phylogenetic level. So we start with yeast, like the most basic eukaryotic cell, and then we go up, we test it in flies, we test it in worms, we test it in mice. We don't test it in humans, but hopefully at some point it will help. But you need such a strategy, because otherwise you need a strategy where you start very at the bottom of the phylogenetic.
I have a question.
Okay.
How successful have you been in this research so far?
Well, we've drunk a lot of wine. That's a lot of success
Always
already. And I mean, this is really research that's going on right now. I mean, we are screening right now a library of around 200 compounds that we have taken from different sources, and we're actually at the moment testing it in yeast. So it's the first step, because yeast, and this would be a different talk, but yeast can also undergo suicide, even though it is an organism that is just composed of one cell. But it's a good model organism. So we're at the moment testing how these compounds act on these cells, and then we will go on to the next step, to a whole organism.
Anyone else from the audience?
Should we drink only red wine?
Oh, no. I mean, you should not, after this talk, only feed on red wine. We've tried that, doesn't work. The whole lab was trying it, no, doesn't work. You should, I mean, wine is one of the, I mean, this is a known thing. It's a compound called resveratrol that's in the wine, and it was in the news and everything. This is also part of our screen as a control, and but I mean, it's not bad to drink red wine. It's always a matter of the dose, of course, and I mean, resveratrol has been shown to be good. Yeah. So, drink wine.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Michael? Michael? Michael, where are you?
Yeah, I'm coming.
What are you doing? That's so bad for your heart.
Having a snack.
You have to
Food.
think about yourself. You're going to die of a heart attack in the next year if you go on like this.
I've been to Dr. Jan. Dr. Jan. Kalinka, Kalinka, Kalinka. Jan Kalinka. And he said to me, Michael, don't worry. My 10 genes are all in order. I've got my 10 genes in order. No heart attack.
To explain what he's going on about, we have our FameLab Olympics winner, Dr. Jan Kalina.
Hi, I work in bioinformatics. Important? No. I can predict if you will suffer from a heart failure in the near future. Important? Oh, yes. Imagine that you are an Olympic athlete. On your marks, get set, go. You run very fast, pushing yourself to the limit, and your heart is under immense stress. Then, suddenly, your heart fails. Why didn't your doctor tell you before the Olympics that this would happen? Let me tell you why. Because a standard heart examination cannot reveal a hidden heart disease. And yet, the genes responsible for the disease are active in your body for several years before the failure. Our research project aims to find out if you have a high risk of a heart attack in the near future. We take blood samples from patients having a heart attack and analyze them using such microarray chips. But how to extract the crucial information from this? That's my job. So now you're probably wondering which genes are the lurking monsters that cause heart attack. But it is very difficult and costly to identify them among the 23,000 genes in your body. So to save money, we use our own simple mathematical procedures to find a diverse set of 10 essential genes. What is that diverse set of genes? Well, it's like the decathlon, a set of 10 diverse disciplines which make very different demands on the body. And so this colorful set of genes is together responsible for a future heart failure. Right now, other scientists are investigating how to turn off the genes that cause your heart attack. But you can already use the practical results of our novel method now, believe me. I mean, isn't it wonderful that we can tell you in time that you will die from a heart failure next spring? Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? I have one. Why 10 genes? Why not 20, 50, 100? You said there are 23,000 genes. Why just 10?
Well, the importance of the result is in the small set of genes. So the examination of the patient is relatively cheap. But the number 10 was found by mathematical methods, and that's the optimal number of genes which are responsible for the disease.
By the simple mathematical methods. Okay. Anyone else? Yes?
Do you plan to use these kind of methods in commercial way? Actually, I'm asking how much?
How much will it cost to get an examination using your method?
Well, the results are protected by some patents at this moment, but of course the way from the theoretical research to the applications is long. So we cannot estimate when this will be available or the financial aspects, yes.
If not from the floor, I have one. Can this mathematical treatise, this algorithm, be used for other ailments and diseases to?
Yes, that's a general methodology for extracting information from high-dimensional measurements. So the gene activities are very massive computations, but the method is general and applicable to any kind of disease.
Right.
Any questions from the audience?
How reliable are the results?
So far, we performed some validation on independent samples, and well, about 90% was the performance of the correct diagnosis, but of course, this can be improved by other examinations. So I would say it's very high.
How many died of those? How many died of a heart attack? How many was a negative conclusion that, you know?
Well, there were some cases, but only before this method was introduced.
Okay. Maybe can I ask the audience here, how many of you would, if you could you like to know if you were likely to have a heart attack? Would you like to have that knowledge? Those of you who would like to have that knowledge, hands up. Up high so we can see, so the camera can see as well. Up high. So again, about maybe 60%, 50, 60% of people would like to.
Looks like you might have a good business in the future.
Yeah. That's a good market, yeah, that's a good market share.
Anyone else have a question for Honza? No one? Actually, I have one. Where did you get the samples?
Well, the samples were obtained in our partner, which is Municipal Hospital in Čáslav.
So they weren't hanging outside McDonald's and or the pub, you know, sort of.
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Imagine
Yes?
you're stranded on an island.
Yes.
Desert island.
With you?
No, you're all alone.
Okay.
3 things.
Yes.
What 3 things would you take?
3 things to take onto a desert island. A hairbrush.
Naturally.
Naturally. A textbook of the complete knowledge of inorganic chemistry,
Of course you would.
without which I could not sleep. And my dog, Brunjas. How about you? What would you take?
I wouldn't take 3 things, because I only need 1. The barefooted Dr. Saab.
I encourage all of you, I encourage everyone to take a look at the night sky. Between the time when the sun goes down and then rises again in the morning, you can see up to 5 planets with your naked eye. I was staring at the red planet last night, thinking to myself, whenever it comes for me the opportunity to live on Mars, I will go in a heartbeat. And I can tell you 3 reasons why. Imagine that you live on an island in the middle of the ocean, and that on your island there is a myth, a legend, that every so many generations, a giant wave arrives, tall as the moon, and wipes out your civilization. Also imagine that on the clearest of days and off on the distant horizon, you can see a second island, but you have no way to get there. And then someone invents a boat. Would you take that boat and go to the second island? You might do it out of pure curiosity. You might do it as a means to safeguard your civilization from the next cataclysmic wave. These are good motivations. But perhaps the most compelling reason for you to go to that second island, or for me to go to Mars, is what we might learn. Despite its fiery appearance, Mars is much, much colder than Earth. You can't wander around in your bare feet, that is for sure. No, to live on Mars, we would have to terraform it. We'd have to change the climate to make it a little bit more like the marble hull of the clam Gallus. And this is not science fiction. It's possible on Mars because there are enormous reserves of carbon dioxide frozen at the poles and elsewhere on the surface. And if we could add just a little heat to the planet, we could start a runaway greenhouse effect that in 50 to 100 years would release so much CO2 that the temperature and pressure on Mars would be hot enough and thick enough for liquid water to flow. Scientists suggest we could do this by smashing asteroids into the planet, or by exploding hydrogen bombs, or even with super space mirrors that would redirect sunlight onto the polar caps. But probably the most practical method would be for people living on Mars to release hydrocarbons. We already have some experience with how that works here on Earth. And then after a few thousand years of introducing more and more complex plants and animals, there would be enough oxygen on Mars that my great-great-great-grandchildren could run around in bare feet and without the need for any scuba gear. So in addition to satisfying our curiosity and helping protect the community of life against events that, for example, wiped out the dinosaurs, going to Mars may teach us things that we cannot yet even imagine. We may even learn how to control the climate back here on Earth. So please, Every time at night, take a look at the sky and find your second island. Thank you.
Any questions?
Come on, there must be a question or two. Who here wants to go to Mars? Who here believes, yes, and who here believes that it's a worthy goal for humanity to try to get there? And who thinks it's a waste of time? You put your hand up twice there. Well, I've got a question for you. I mean, okay, we can get to Mars, let's say, or we can make it whatever technology, whatever process we choose to use. I can envisage how we can increase the temperature there for a while, and we release the carbon dioxide, which you talked about. But does Mars have the gravitational pull force to hold such an atmosphere in place?
Yeah, it does. So part of the reason why the atmosphere is so thin on Mars right now, it's only about 0.6% of the thickness of Earth's atmosphere, is because of how cold it is. And that's because its core cooled down much faster than that of Earth's, because the planet itself is much smaller. But it has the ability to hold on to the atmosphere. It's just that the carbon dioxide, which makes up Mars' atmosphere, has been compressed down into a frozen state. And so if we heat it up, we can increase the pressure on Mars by 500 times. It would be about 30% of Mars' atmosphere, or Earth's atmosphere at that point. And it would be safe for us to walk around without any pressurized suits. So it can hold on to an atmosphere. Mm-hmm. It did in the past, and it can in the future.
Yes?
To compare the population of Mars with the population on the Earth in comparison with Americans and European people after Columbus.
Yeah, and I understand. A lot of people have made that argument that says if we send people to a new planet, they will have the opportunity to be an experiment in themselves. And if you look at the people who went to the United States or the Americas, they were able to innovate, create new things, and a lot of this technology came back to Europe, and it's considered one of the main reasons why Europe developed so fast compared to other areas of the world, is because of this release of their imagination once they realized the map of the world was different. And I think that the same type of release and understanding of what is possible would happen once people got to Mars and started living there and pioneering and being stable and independent from supplies from Earth. I think it's a huge thing for humanity to accomplish.
Can I develop a bit on that question? I mean, to draw on that same parallel, I've read several books about the early passages of Europeans to the new continent of America. And on those early voyages, many people died on the way. A lot of people went into that passage with complete knowledge of the high risk that they won't survive the journey. Now, presumably it's also going to mean if we go to Mars, if we're serious about it, it's going to mean loss of human life. Pioneers are going to go there, something's not going to work, they're going to die. Do you think that's a worthy price to pay?
Absolutely. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, you would never want to pick somebody and say, okay, I have to kill you in order to accomplish something else. But I don't think that individuals, certainly not myself, are afraid to risk their own life for something greater than themselves. And that happens all the time with willing soldiers that go to war. They are fighting for a real cause. And in this case, I think it's much, much more noble than settling some score between two politicians. We are becoming a multi-planet-faring species. I mean, that is an incredible thing. And we are really protecting the community of life against huge events of the cosmos, which will definitely ensure that life on Earth will become impossible one day. And so I think the universe gave us life, and we are responsible for making sure that it continues. It's something we can give back to the universe.
Any more comments or questions?
Can I ask one question to the audience? So forget Mars for a minute. What about the second island? Would you go to that second island? Anybody? Show of hands.
Who'd go?
Would you leave behind what you know and what you have and believe that that second island will bring to you a greater wealth and happiness? Do you take that risk? Yeah. So hands up clearly, please, so that the camera can see as well. So again, that must be 50% of people. 50% of people are willing to take that risk to go into the unknown. That's positive, I think.
Any questions? Nobody?
Yes.
Do you suppose that there will be possible to try to make Mars ready for people?
Well, the NASA program of the United States had envisioned going to Mars in the 70s or early 80s. But the program was scrapped by Richard Nixon at the time. And the technology is foreseeably there. We have rockets that can take us to Mars. In fact, it's actually, you need less fuel to go to Mars than you do to go to the moon, because when you go to the moon, there's no atmosphere and you have to use fuel to slow down. But when you go to Mars, you can use the atmosphere to slow you down. And so technically it's possible to get there. It's just a matter of being willing to take that risk and thinking that it's a worthwhile cause, and then doing it. But there is a company right now, there have been a few companies that have opened trying to do this, and there's one right now that's called Mars One, and they're interested in sending people in September of 2022. And whether or not that's a realistic date, I do not know, but it's certainly feasible with the technology we have now.
And do you think that the private company should be the one to actually go to Mars, or should it be NASA, like government?
Well, I don't think it matters, and the reason is because I think whoever winds up getting to Mars will then associate themselves with Mars more than they associate themselves with Earth. So if it's a one-way trip and you know that you're going to die on Mars, I think that you will really feel like that is your home. And because you're so far away, I mean, even to send a signal can take anywhere from 15 minutes to 45 minutes. So there's no internet, there's no back and forth email, there's no phone calls or anything like that. You're so disconnected from whoever sent you that you don't have to really take their orders, right? You can just do whatever you want, more or less, and they can't do anything about it except for maybe stop to send you supplies. But Mars has a 24-hour day, it has soil, you can grow plants just like you do on Earth. And so I think it's very possible for humans on Mars to become independent from Earth within at least a couple decades.
But if we follow that line of logic, that means that in the same way as what happened eventually between Britain and America, the colonies in America and Britain, is that it led to war. So the original colonists go there as Brits, George Washington of Britain, and then eventually he turns around and says, no, in fact, I have a great affinity for America. I view myself as American, not as British. And then conflict ensues. So perhaps on that form of logic, then we could have a real war of the worlds, where all of a sudden the Martians could turn their backs on the people from Earth. And
I think we can learn a lot from what happened with the discovery of Americas and the attempt to colonize. And I think that people go to Mars and they, for example, discover life there. I think that they will be motivated to try and actually preserve it and live in harmony with that life as best they can. I think that the human race is far more civilized than we were, as a planet compared to 500 years ago. And I think any company or government that would send people to Mars would have to realize that they're going to want to be independent at some point in time. And ideally, the sooner the better, because it's going to be very expensive to try to keep them alive on freeze-dried ice cream and so forth.
Yes?
Actually, my son has a question about the expenses. How much does it cost to bring first people to Mars?
Yeah, so there are many different estimations. And the main difference in the cost is whether or not you're going to come back. So if you don't come back, the mission becomes much, much cheaper. Mars One plans Mars One plans on sending 40 people, so 4 people every 2 years over the course of 20 years. And they project that they need $6 billion to do it, which is roughly the budget of 1 year of Toronto, the city of Toronto. It's not a huge amount of money, but it is, takes some time to raise that type of money. 6 billion, yeah, euros or dollars. I mean, it's a lot of money.
Anyone else? Any questions?
anybody got 6 billion euros here?
Yeah, we'd like to go. No?
In that case,
next time, maybe.
Thank you very much. What are you doing?
What do you think I'm doing?
I don't know, somebody getting married or something? What you throwing into the air?
Sand, of course.
Sand?
Yeah.
You want to go on that desert island with Dr. Saab, don't you?
Of course I do.
Why sand?
Well, isn't it obvious?
No.
I'm trying to make clouds.
You're trying to make clouds?
Yeah.
But how can you make clouds from sand?
Well, I'm not the expert here about that, but we do have an expert here with us today.
We do indeed. It's her name is. She's also a fellow tropical islander. It's Dr. Rosalind West from the UK, who will be telling us about how to make clouds using a bit of sand.
Have you noticed that the clouds are getting whiter? On a grey day like today, it's quite hard to believe. But it turns out that the effect that humans are having on the whiteness of clouds is actually a significant factor in our effect on the climate. You probably remember from doing the water cycle at school that the way that clouds form when water evaporates from rivers and the sea. This water vapor rises and cools, and as it cools, it really wants to turn from a gas back into a liquid, but it needs something to liquefy onto. Luckily, there are loads of tiny particles in the atmosphere, stuff like dust blown from the deserts and grains of salt from the sea. And every one of these microscopic particles can act as the seed of a cloud droplet. The fact that clouds look white tells us that they reflect a lot of light. So some of the sunlight coming down through the atmosphere is reflected back to space by the clouds, rather than being absorbed by the dark blue ocean or the dark green land underneath. That means that the surface of the Earth is cooler than it would otherwise have been. You've probably heard that burning fossil fuels has an effect on the climate because it releases carbon dioxide, which leads to global warming. But burning fossil fuels also releases millions of tiny particles into the atmosphere. These provide more potential seeds for cloud droplets. That means that when a cloud does form, it contains more droplets. If we've got more droplets, but the same total volume of water, those droplets are going to be smaller. I can show you what difference this makes using clear glass beads. These beads are quite large, and they look quite transparent, but these smaller ones look a lot whiter. They're still just made of clear glass, and we've got the same total volume of them, 1 jar, that's a scientific unit, but they look a lot whiter because they've got more surface area. So smaller beads of glass, or smaller droplets of water, reflect more light. By making cloud droplets smaller, we're making the Earth look whiter on average. This means that more of the incoming sunlight is reflected back to space. So every cloud has a silver lining. We think that this cooling, due to whiter clouds, is offsetting about half of the warming due to carbon dioxide, which is quite a big deal. So, could we take this one step further and add even more particles into the atmosphere to make the Earth even cooler? Well, maybe, but this so-called geoengineering could have some unintended consequences. For example, if we make droplets smaller, they take longer to grow large and heavy enough to fall out as rain. So we could disrupt the water cycle and cause even more environmental damage in the form of flooding and droughts than the global warming that we're trying to prevent. Scientists are working right now to try and understand some of the links between clouds and climate and how humans have affected the clouds. So, on boring, overcast days like today, try and remember that the clouds are more interesting than you might think.
Any questions from the audience? Global warming, global cooling, clouds?
Yes, sir.
Do you think that changes of the volume of droughts are connected with flooding that were recently in New York, before in Great Britain, 10 years ago in the Czech Republic? Do you think that it's connected?
It's difficult to attribute the individual events directly to global warming, but what we can do is say that the statistical likelihood of them occurring has increased due to that. So I think that it's highly likely.
Well, I'm presuming that if you're heating up the system, any system, you're putting more energy in there, then you're getting faster evaporation rates and different sort of changes in the condensation.
Yeah, your
where it's
effects on
happening.
the water cycle are going to be.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The cloud in IT is less dangerous than your gaming with the clouds in atmosphere.
Yeah, but nobody's actually doing anything about it. That's just theory right now.
I think that it is very dangerous to experiment with such unknown.
Yeah, I really agree with you. And so some of the work that I've been doing on this idea of geoengineering has been trying to demonstrate the massive uncertainties that the current models that we have. So I work on the UK Met Office climate model. And what I've been trying to do with that is to use it to show how great the uncertainties are in each of the stages of the process, and hence show how little we know, and therefore that we probably shouldn't be doing this.
If I may develop from what you said, there was, I can't remember, what year was it now? Somebody here might help me. But there was the disaster at Chernobyl.
86.
In 86, where in the Ukraine there was a huge explosion at a nuclear reactor, and a lot of radioactive material went into the air. And the winds in those days, they were pushing it towards Moscow. And a decision was made, apparently a decision was made in Moscow to seed clouds above White Russia.
In the hope that it would force rainfall.
Well, and it did. It induced rainfall, and therefore it got a lot of the radioactive material fell down on this region rather than going as far as a heavily densely populated megacity as is Moscow. So, and those populations now, of course, are suffering from all sorts of illnesses and diseases and malfunctions. So it is truly a very powerful technology, I think. And I mean, do you believe that, I mean, could we use this sort of technology and know how to influence hurricanes and tornadoes and push them off course, or get them to really rain down a lot? And we could perhaps even use it as a weapon to induce flooding somewhere, or are these things all possible?
Criminal mastermind, Dr. Michael Londesborough.
I think that at the moment, our understanding of the physical processes is not even good enough to be able to do that. Never mind the computational models that we'd need to be able to simulate those processes, and then never mind actually putting it into practice. So
yeah.
I think that we're a long way, thankfully, from being able to use weather modification as a weapon.
Any questions?
I have heard, and I don't know whether it's true, that during Chinese Olympics, some special chemical compounds were spread in the atmosphere to form clouds and cause rain, which had to be in a polluted atmosphere in Peking. Is that true?
I'm not actually sure. So there hasn't been anything published on that. So there's been a kind of radio silence on it. So I'm not sure whether they actually did it or not.
So is it perhaps a better question, is it possible?
I think it probably is possible, yes.
Anyone else? I actually have one last question. If we stopped releasing these extra particles into the atmosphere, burning fossil fuels, how quickly would we notice a change? Because you said that it's countering almost 50% of global warming.
Yeah, so it's actually quite, I mean, it's interesting because when you think about the Clean Air Act and we're trying to clean up our emissions, as we do that, we probably will notice that in some ways you'll see that the effect of global warming is stronger, because as we're clearing up the emissions, we'll be getting rid of this mask due to the extra particles. So I think that you'll see that tailing off. In terms of when you inject particles into the atmosphere, how long do they last? Probably about a week to 10 days. So you would notice it. If you switched it off altogether, you'd notice it quite suddenly, I think.
Thank you. If there's no one else. Okay, thank you, Rosalind.
Well, with that little cloudburst of fantastic scientific information and knowledge, it brings our international scientific extravaganza to a close.
I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming, and we all hope that you had a good time. And
of course, a big thank you to the people who've come all this way to present to you some fascinating science.